As you can probably recognize, the first and most important thing with good management is surround yourself with great people and get out of the way, which is a lot of what I've done. And in fact, many of them, and Kerry is one who's been more gentle, will tell you that there's a guy called Tim Harris, for instance, who will tell you he did all the work and I just hung around, which actually is sort of true. But on the other hand, he still hangs around with me, which is probably good. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is speak for about 20, 25 minutes, and then we're going to have a conversation and open it up for Q&A. And I'm going to talk about some themes from my book. And I'm going to begin by telling you why I wrote the book. Then a little bit about how I tried to do something very googly. And I know a little bit about Google because when Stockholm IP was formed, a gentleman came to our office and no one took him seriously. His name was Sergey Brin. Okay, this was 1999. So that sort of gives you an idea of how long we've been there. And one of my daughters spent 5 years in Mountain View, so I have some concept of what goes on in this place, though no one has ever given me a job here, so that's a different thing. So, with that being said, the reason I wrote the book was because I was very worried that something was going wrong all across business in the world. So this is not an advertising or marketing book. This is basically a business book. And I was worried that because of companies like yourselves and Facebook and Amazon and others, that people were starting to tilt towards what I call the left brain. They were tilting more and more towards math. And as a result, I thought they were hurting people, society, and in the middle to long run, they were hurting their own employees and they were hurting their own company. And as someone with an advanced degree in mathematics, an MBA in finance, and someone who has some credentials in understanding what digital is and was, I thought I would be an interesting voice to say so, because it wasn't like I was an art student who was anti-technology to do so. And I shared some of these thoughts in a fireside chat in September, I believe, in Soldier Field. Some of you all may have been there. I know Mac was there, and mentioned it to your management. And I basically, I just spoke the other day to 2,000 people at Twitter on responsibility in an age of data, okay? And where Matt Terla and Jack Dorsey asked me to speak to them. So this is not a anti-tech, anti-science, anti-the future person, right? I'm pro-Google, pro-Amazon, and then I'm not that pro some other people, and I'm pro-future change. But here was the concern. The concern was the following. One, we were basically putting such an emphasis on what I call the spreadsheet side of our business, which is the data, the number, and the math, because the most valuable companies in the world, like Google, like Microsoft, like Amazon, were basically in this country, in Baidu and Alibaba, others, and other places, were being driven by math. That I was trying to explain to my clients that data is going to be like electricity for most companies, which is you can't live without it, but no company outside of a few can differentiate themselves on electricity. Do you hear of any company that basically says we use electricity better, which is why we are a better company? Now, a company that doesn't use electricity doesn't exist today. But a company that basically, outside of you all and a few companies, I do not believe a company will differentiate on its use of data 5 years from now. I believe a company will have to have world-class data to remain in business. Obviously, companies like yours, which are truly data-driven companies, it's a different deal, but most companies won't. They will succeed and differentiate because of the story side of their business. And the story side of the business is basically the talent, the culture, the values, and purpose of the company. I'll give you an idea how that works. I do not have a citation for this. I wish I had written it down, but it is not something I made up because I don't have to make this up. But let's look at one of your competitors, not your competitor, but one of the companies in your space, which is Facebook. So Facebook, 2 years ago, if someone who was an engineer got a job at Facebook, 90% of them accepted the job. Today, that number is 49%. The only thing that's changed is the story. Their data is the same. They got more customers. They got a whole bunch of other stuff. But basically, people say, do I actually trust you? And there are people who say, I'm not proud as a world-class engineer saying I work at Facebook. You all have the same issue to a certain extent at Google, right? And so what I've told people is that if you don't focus on the purpose, you don't focus on the meaning, the most talented people will leave a company. This is the way I basically got to run some of the best companies inside the agency business, is I attracted the best talent. And I basically got them to believe that what they were doing was meaningfully important, right? They had great fun. And so what tends to basically happen is folks like you all and like senior management believe what is important and is important in any career is fame and money and power. And I will tell you that money, fame, and power are important. So anybody who says that isn't important, then they are basically either the Dalai Lama or someone else like that. Okay. However, after a point, I can also tell you that fame, power, and money are insufficient. And what is sufficient is purpose, growth, and connections. And this is something I've studied over the years. So what basically happens is, fine, I got a little bit of fame, I got a little bit of power, a little bit of meaning. But not everybody will be able to get power and fame. They may get money, right? But some people will get all of those. But then what you basically begin to have are the other three. And those are, can you grow as a person? That's growth. Purpose. Are you doing something that's meaningful and you feel good about? And connections. How do you feel about the people you work with? Your bosses, your colleagues, the people who work for you. And successful companies have those following work. And let me go outside the category. Until Walmart got a new CEO, it was a horrible place to walk into, right? If you walked into a Costco and you walked into a Walmart, they were two totally different experiences, but they were the same thing, if you actually think about it. The difference was, in Costco, the store managers got to run the stores, and they invested in the people. In Walmart, they basically said, how do I cut costs? Walmart stock initially did better than Costco, and then the contest was over. So that gives you an idea of a simple thing. Let's look at Southwest versus United Airlines. If you look at the numbers, Southwest basically has a 2.4% turnover rate. 2.4% of the people turnover. In United, 20% turnover. Which one is more productive? Whose stock price has done better? Which airline is more fun to fly? Southwest. So when people basically tell me it's all about the math, I say you should, as a leader, fire yourself immediately. Let me prove to you again why that is true, because I know you all are a data-driven company. I'll go back now into this category, which is the industry category. So one of my chapters starts with a concept which I'll talk to you about, which is called the turd on the table, which is when you're sitting around a table, all of you all are gathering around, and there's something brown and moist, and you all think it's a brownie, it's usually a piece of shit. But none of you all may be brave enough to say so. People were not brave enough at Wells Fargo to say, why are we opening accounts that are fake? And now you know what happened to Wells Fargo. People basically were not brave enough at Boeing to basically say, what the hell are we doing with 737 MAX? Now there's email. The moment that happened, I said, I know there's a paper trail there for 2 to 3 years. These things don't happen without people not being allowed to speak up. People are too smart. I think talent is too smart not to know some shit's going on, but people have not been able to say so because of power and a whole bunch of things. But on the turd on the table, this chapter starts with me having a conversation with a gentleman you may or may not know. He's another one of the famous Indians that seem to be running all technology. His name is Shantanu Narayan. He's the CEO of Adobe. And he had come, and it was about 15, 20 years ago. And we're talking about partnering. And I said, Shantanu, you just bought an agency. And now you're talking about partnering. Explain to me how this thing works. right? So I said, I want to call the turd out on the table. You're here and you're like my competition talking about partnering. And then he explained what he was doing, and he says, thank you very much, and we became friends. He's one of the people who basically endorsed my book, and he shows up in this chapter. And I sent it to him saying, is this okay? He says, yes, I remember this, which is whatever it was. But look at Adobe. 10 years ago, about 8, 9 years ago, Shantanu made a decision which basically was a non-numerical decision. And his non-numerical decision was he was going to stop selling software, packaged software, and basically go to subscription using the cloud. His stock price fell by about 70% in the next 2 years. Why? Because his revenue fell by 70%, by 60 to 70% in the next 2 years. Because instead of selling a $400 piece of software, he was basically selling you $9.99 a month, which only added up to $120 at the end of the year. So he had 120. He was replacing $400 of revenue every 3 years with $120 of revenue. And his stock price fell down to $30, and he said, okay, but I did the right things. So last week, his stock price was $375. And last week, his company basically was the most valuable enterprise software company in the world after Microsoft. Ahead of Oracle, ahead of SAP, ahead of everybody. He made a non-numerical leadership decision. He actually did the math, but he didn't say, my stock price has to be kept high and I'm so scared, so I'm not going to basically do stuff, right? When Satya Nadella came over, he didn't go shouting like Steve Ballmer, Windows, 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 right? He shut down the Windows division. He, along with you all and Amazon and Apple, are grappling for the most valuable company in America. Guess what he focused on? People. He basically gave everybody a book called The Growth Mindset. In fact, my agent is the publisher, or is the agent of Carol Dweck, of The Growth Mindset. And he says, your book is like that. So I said, good, hopefully other people will read it, right? But what tends to basically happen is, so whenever you tell me that the numbers make you do something, I will tell you will be out of a job very quickly. Because your AI and Microsoft's AI, and maybe one day, Amazon's AI and everybody else's AI, is going to start making numerical decisions in our jobs better than we are going to be making numerical decisions. Your CEO has said it's going to be bigger than fire and electricity, and I believe him. And therefore, if you tell me that your job is to read a spreadsheet and make a mathematical decision, your company is going to make you obsolete before they're going to make me obsolete, because they'll first come to save money by making you obsolete, right? And therefore, again and again, when people tell me it's all about the spreadsheet, and I'm basically saying, no, it's the spreadsheet and the story. If it's all story and not spreadsheet, and you don't have data, and you don't have math, and you don't have income, you know what you have? You have WeWork. Right? We don't need no WeWork. But what basically happens is, I'm simply saying, is if the world is going to succeed, we're going to have to do something interesting. Now, when I was in the bathroom, and I've become so used to going to Google stuff, I said, I'm going to learn something good, because while I'm pissing, I'm going to read the thing on the top. So interestingly, I read the thing on the top, and I said, oh, these guys are doing better than the rest of the world, but not bad. So if I read what I was reading correctly, 22% of you all are disengaged at work. The number for the United States is 55%. 55% of employees are disengaged at work. And guess what management says? Let's do the following. Let's put out press releases. Let's talk about bullshit. Let's have fewer meetings. Let's talk about math. What do you think is going to make them more engaged or less engaged? Right? As a person with advanced mathematics, I've gone out of my way to make sure that my job doesn't depend on advanced mathematics, because advanced mathematics is done faster by machines. Let's say you're a lawyer. They did a test. Lawyers looking at NDAs for mistakes, right? The average lawyer to go through this document took 30 minutes, and they've covered 97. They discovered 95% of the mistakes. A machine did it in 3 seconds with 99% accuracy. So Therefore, I believe that business can only come back when it's restoring its soul, and its soul is its people, its meaning, and its culture. And so my book basically is about that. And I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 concepts, then we'll open up for questions. But I just wanted to customize this to you all. So one is, there's a chapter on it called Too Much Math. Okay, when I was speaking at your big event, I sent an advanced copy of my book, and they said, here are the 6 chapters that are most applicable to Google. So the way I've written my book is I've basically tried to rethink what a book is. It's 12 different chapters. You can read any chapter in any order. It's a Spotify playlist. Each one is a freestanding book, right? For a modern YouTube video age, it's like 15, 20 minutes. I mean, each depends on how fast a reader you are. It's about half an hour a chapter or so. But the ones that related, one was called Too Much Math, Too Little Meaning, which is how do you actually extract meaning from mathematics, which is number one. Another one was called Change Sucks. And the reality of it is, even if you're a company that drives change like Google, you all as individuals are constantly being buffeted by change, right? New technologies, new policies, new laws, new legal, new something. And so I've always believed that change sucks. And the reason I believe change sucks is the following. Isn't it interesting when people come to you and say change is good, they want you to change, but they're saying it's good. When they come and tell me, I basically say, I'm happy you change. Now, I've remained in the same company for 37 years, not because, it's one of 2 reasons. Either I hate change or I'm unemployable. That's basically it, okay? I've lived in the same city for 39. I've known my wife for 48 years since we were 12, so I hate change. But when you actually look at my bio, and it's not fake, it looks like I've been driving a lot of change. The reason is because I know how much it sucks, but you know what sucks worse than change? Is irrelevance. And I basically watched a lot of my friends become irrelevant because they refuse to change. To this date, I worry a lot that I'm one of the few people in my company who's very adept at social media and the senior management. And they say, why are you doing this? I said, this is the way you engage. This is the way you sell books. This is the way you build brands. But most importantly, there's something else for this reason. And that is because people follow people, they don't follow titles. Make no mistake. You will have to genuflect for a title because some crazy person can fire you, right? So you have to say, yes, madam, thank you very much. You go outside, have a beer, and say, what a woman. She should be shot. Right? But then you will follow people who you believe are inspiring, who take you to the other side, which is important. And so I know you're in this process where you're all trying to get better. I think you're reviewing each other and reviewing yourselves or whatever the process is. So one of the chapters that is very valuable in my book, and I'm just going to talk about these last 2, one of them is how to upgrade your mental operating system. And another one is called how to lead with soul. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about those 2 before opening it for questions, because I think those are very important. So my underlying concept of my book is how to see, think, and feel differently about growing your company, your team, and yourself. So screw Google, they can look after themselves. So you just worry about your team and yourself, right? So growing your team is how to be a leader. And what I've understood among good leaders is that there is nothing like a good leader or a bad leader. All of us have in us the qualities of being a good leader and a bad leader. The good leaders tend to be good leaders most of the time, and once in a while they show bad tendencies. The bad leaders tend to primarily be bad leaders most of the time, excepting at evaluation time where they show some of their good tendencies, right? It's what they basically do. What's common among good leaders are their 5 characteristics of the good leaders. The first one is they're capable. And I found that people sometimes forget that you have to be capable to be a good leader, right? You have to know what you're doing. So one is capability. The other is integrity. Can you trust them? The third one is vulnerability. Will they actually tell you when they don't know what they're doing? The third is empathy. Can they see your perspective? Can they see someone else's perspective? And fifth is inspiration. Can they basically make you do things that the numbers tell you should not be doing? Right? Those are the 5 characteristics. And all of us, all of you, regardless of whether you've got hundreds of people reporting to you or nobody reporting to you, have the potential to be a great leader. At the same stage, each of us have some constraints of a bad leader. The good people showed the bad leadership traits under pressure when things get really intense. Sometimes you don't know what the hell you're doing. So one of them is the narcissist. So the narcissist is I, me, mine, everything is all about me. The other one is the micromanaging fiddler. This particularly occurs when there is a big pitch or a big proposal. The micromanaging fiddler has to make sure that every single page is correct. The third one is the Oscar contender, and I'm sure you'll have worked for some Oscar contenders. They slam doors, they sigh, they look away, they yell, they cry, all kinds of other stuff. And the last one is the double-crossing assassin, okay? You know who those are, right? And so the reality of it is I'm calling them out, and a lot of people are giving these to their bosses and saying, read this chapter. I hope it's for the good part versus the bad part. But it's a very flexible thing. But I want to sort of end with the most important thing, which is, okay, Google's fine, Teams fine, what about me, right? And how to upgrade your mental operating system is something that is extremely critical, because I believe that for Google to succeed, you all are going to basically have to think differently. And I'm going to give you one concept that you have to think differently, which is not in the book, because this book is not about advertising or marketing. So I believe that Google is no longer an advertising operating system. I believe Facebook is no longer an advertising operating system. I believe Amazon is no longer a transaction operating system with an advertising operating system. I believe the three of you all are society operating systems. Society operates on y'all, not advertising. And the more you optimize for advertising, the more you're likely to hurt society. I'm just saying that. 5 years ago, I spoke at Facebook. I still have a thing from David Fisher saying, you were so brave, and I said, I was so right to. This was immediately after the election, not 4 years ago, 3 years ago, February 2017, right? And I said, make no mistake, all of you are all stunned in California about the election results. These election results were because your system was gamed in part. And they said, no, no, no. I said, don't be stupid. You're telling me your stuff works for advertising and doesn't work for political advertising? It works better for political advertising than advertising. I need two things for political advertising: micro-targeting and emotion. I can get it, right? No, we don't do anything like that. I said, wake up now, right? That's the key thing that people have to basically sort of understand. This is no longer about that. I'm at the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago basically now is asking whether companies like yours have to be broken up. These are the people who created the antitrust rules that helped take away antitrust, right? Are now basically saying what the hell has happened. Simple thing has happened. It's about society and no longer about consumers. And that's the key thing that you'll have to sort of think about, because I do believe that Google is very valuable in the future, is a great company, but in effect, unless you'll think differently and you still think in the same way, you'll be like surprised. When Balmer was thinking Windows, 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 all it required is Satya Nadella to close down the division and say, no, it's about the cloud. We're not about consumer, we're basically about enterprise. And that changed the whole mindset. Mindset matters. How do you all change your mindsets? Maybe Google won't change their mindset, but you can change your mindset, because companies get better when the people in the company change their mindsets. So number one, very easy to do, try to do one new thing every day. When you do one new thing every day, you figure out, and I'm not just saying at work, in your private lives, whatever, that's when you're alive. You're alive when you're doing something new. You remember when you're traveling and your plane gets canceled or you get detoured to a new place? You're now paying attention because it's all new, right? So go home in a new way. Go to a new restaurant. Like when I came in here, I said, what's my new thing? So I said, I better go check out the city market shit. They got a great hot dog, by the way. Stuff like that. So always do one new thing a day. The other one, which you'd be surprised, I'm sure you all do it, but maybe you all don't, you must invest 1 hour a day in learning new things. Don't think that because you're at Google, you're going to remain smart. Please. No. You're going to be in this halo of self-love. It's not going to work that way. Okay? It'll feel really good, but no babies will be born. Okay. I'm really doing something else. So With that being said, you have to basically invest an hour every day learning. I wake up every morning at 4:30 and I learn for an hour and a half. I take a little bit more time than most people. I'm getting older, but most of you all can do it in an hour. I'm not saying you get up at 4:30. You spend 7 hours a week learning. If you don't spend 7 hours a week learning, you will become irrelevant. The only reason that I still know what the hell is going on is because I was doing that, right? So I can talk about things like we're entering the third connected age. I can describe the last 25 years in the fact that the first connected age, which is what made your company, was about connecting to transactions and connecting to information. You all are the information company. Amazon is the transaction company. The second was, guess what? Connecting to everybody, connecting all the time, and connecting to the cloud. Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. Right? We're now entering the third connected age. Data connecting to data, AI. You all have a play there. Things connecting to things, IoT. New ways of connecting, voice, much faster ways of connecting, 5G. Google Home is a device. So I've just looked at the last 25 years. How? Because I've studied stuff besides the advertising business. I paid no attention to God, I'm Omnicom, no attention to WPP, because my whole stuff is being less pathetic than other pathetic people still makes me pathetic. And I'm not taking away from them because all of us are pathetic. So similarly, if you all the time you're basically only focusing in your industry, you'll miss what's coming, because the future doesn't come from the heavens, it comes from the slime. IBM did not see Microsoft, Microsoft did not see Google, you all did not see Facebook, then you all tried G+, which was a sucker, et cetera, right? And the reason Google, you all didn't see it is because you all came at it from a math thing. The moment I saw it, I said, these are mathematicians designing this shit. Small little groups, etc. And I knew a lot because my daughter actually worked on Google Plus in the special floor in Mountain View where she was next to Sergey and everybody. My stuff is the biggest shit I've ever seen in my life, right? Why are you doing it like this? Why are you doing it like this? But everybody, oh, it's Sergey's project. He's an idiot on that project. Someone should say it to him, right? So that's the thing that you have to be very important. But the most important thing is this, which is you have to build a case for the exact opposite of what you believe. So whenever someone comes into the room and tries to sell me something, I said, tell me why the exact opposite of what you just told me is right. And if they say, we don't know, I said, then how do you believe what you just told me? So I go to our management and I build cases as to why they should not do things that I've recommended to them. And sometimes I'm so good at building those cases that they call me and say, I have to have breakfast with you. Did you recommend this, or you're saying we shouldn't do it? Literally, I had breakfast with Arthur Sadoun, right? He says, you said this epsilon thing was good, but now you're saying it's all bad. Is it good or is it bad? I said, it's good. But I said, I'm giving you facts on both sides, right? And then I said, then as a leader, we got to make a call. And my call basically is, we die slowly or we die fast, or we live. I mean, we die slowly, die fast, or live. And I said, we don't do things like that, we die slowly. This will either make us die fast or live, so choose. Simple choice, right? That's the kind of stuff that I think you'll need to do, because I truly believe that you're an amazing talent and an amazing company, and your company needs you more than you need your company. And the day you don't work in a company where you believe that you are more valuable than the company, you're working for the wrong company. That's what I told all my folks, right? I have a thing. My whole stuff is, you're at a good place if you keep increasing your market value and the company depends on you. But if you basically are sitting there thinking you're some sort of baby, right, suckling at the nipple of basically Google, go find another job, is what I simply basically say. Because that means you're slowly becoming irrelevant. You're not actually growing the company, you're just growing yourself. It's all controversial, but this is the way to actually think, because you all have the ability to both change your company and further your career like nobody else that I know, but you'll just have to think different, as the man from Apple said.
Back in the early days of Starcom IP, when anybody joined the team or the department, we would have weekly meetings, And as that new person came in, they were put on the spot and asked to justify their existence. And you weren't supposed to really talk too much about like your professional, your education. It was supposed to be something that really brought out like who you are as a human, what's your silly talent. I can remember a woman did limericks. There was somebody that went up on a table and did his fight song.
Yes.
Do you remember that? A woman played the tuba. I don't remember how I justified my existence. Doesn't matter, but I know I wasn't in the room when you would have had to do it. So can you please justify your existence?
So I now justify my existence as basically in two ways. One is I'm still trying to basically learn from my kids, so I'm staying around to learn from them, who are a little bit older now. But as importantly, I do believe that I have a message and a story that I want to tell, which is sort of in my book. And so my current existence is, how do I get all the people who helped me over the years thrive, but as importantly, give back to all the young people, as well as my colleagues and peers, because I'm now in a fortunate position where I don't have to worry about crazy things like, in the old days, I would always worry someone would send hate mail saying, why is he saying something like this? Now I'm an advisor to the company. I'm not an employee of Publicis, so no clients can say, we fire Publicis, because Publicis will say, the guy doesn't work for us. He's just like an emeritus professor. He's a crazy guy. Sorry, we take pity on him. All right? So the whole thing is, my current belief is I'm sort of teaching, but teaching in a different way, which is trying to get people to recognize that they have amazing potential, but often because of what's going on in society, often because they're so scared that they aren't as good as they should be. So I'm trying to get people to see, think, and feel differently.
I love it because even for today, I was going to get a VP to come and do this moderation, and she wasn't available. And so I was like, Rishad, we could change the date. And he goes, no, Carrie, you can do this. I was like, are you sure I can do this? He's like, yes, let's have you be my plan A. So he like lives this out all the time. And I have benefited.
And I'm so old, right, that now the CEOs of my competing companies were trainees under me. That's how sad it is. Okay. And they still invite me, which is kind of good.
Let's talk a little bit more about how you stay relevant, because this man, you've talked about it a little bit earlier today, but can you give us just some little more nuggets on like the types of sources you go to, what types of topics you're like most interested in now? If you're going to spend an hour every single day learning something, what's driving you? What are you learning about?
So there are 4 broad topics that I'm now studying, and they're in 4 different gradients. So one of them that I am studying a lot about is what happens when leadership fails. Okay, so what is starting to basically happen is I truly believe that we have a leadership crisis in the world. We have a leadership crisis at the political level. We have a leadership crisis in business. And why do leaders fail and how do leaders succeed? So this whole thing about leadership, I'm reading a lot about it, both historical, and today, because there was a time when I could look around and there were a lot of people I admired, and that list is getting smaller and smaller. And so my whole stuff is, why is that happening? So that's sort of one thing. Because the people haven't got worse, right? So that's number one. The second area that I'm studying a lot about is what is the implications when technology exponentially increases much faster than human beings can adapt. So Moore's law, the processing power doubled every 18 months. What I read is AI capabilities are doubling every 90 days. And when you basically take AI and you take biotechnology and you combine those two, what we basically now have, and that's the reason why Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, and all are basically saying we have to legislate AI, because I think these are amazing leaders. I think Sundar Pichai is a fantastic leader. I think Satya Nadella is a fantastic leader. And what I think Bob Iger of Disney, who basically made the hard decision, to go into streaming, is a great leader. So they're still very good leaders. So that's why I'm studying leadership. I'm studying how the good leaders do it. But as similarly, what I'm finding interesting is whether it's Musk or Gates or Satya Nadella or Sundar Pichai, they're all very worried about AI. And at the same time, they're talking about its potential to change society in the good. So I'm trying to figure that one out because it's a society impact. The third one is, it's really fun, but I'm following a deep dive on filmmaking. And it's not because my daughter is in filmmaking. It's because I just got fascinated by it. And what I would encourage you all to do, if you all haven't done this, is there is a show called Better Call Saul. Okay? It's the prequel to Breaking Bad. So if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, see it. It's the best show ever on American television. But even if you haven't seen this, fine. This is the prequel. You don't have to. And around season 4, it got better than Breaking Bad. I tell you, without a doubt, it got better than Breaking Bad. But here's the key thing. It has a podcast with it. And the podcast is unlike any podcast. Most of these show podcasts review the show, like who did what and et cetera. This is basically the showrunners. So it's like Vince Gilligan and the people, right? The editor, the people who make it, the product, on how they made that episode. And it is just looking at that show and looking at the podcast and reading books about art and film, because to me, we're living in an age where television has become the highest art form in the world. It's overtaken movies, right? And to a great extent, how does that thing, and I'm fascinated by that, so I'm studying a lot of that. And it's fun, but I'm doing sort of the nerdy element of it, which is the key element. And the last one, which I'm spending a whole bunch of time on, is somewhat fascinating, which is about writing. But I'm rereading the great writers. So in my book, I talk about if you want to get great insights, sometimes you don't have to go to a focus group, right? Read Madame Bovary, read Anna Karenina. You learn more about people than any focus group will. So I'm trying to figure out how literature of the past can allude to the future. So one is art, one is literature, one is AI, and one is leadership. So you think about business, science, movies, and words. And then I combine them because a big part of my belief is innovation is connecting dots. So I'm trying to have many dots and then, trying to create Reese's Pieces with the butter and the peanut butter and the chocolate.
Nice. Love that. It's always a good combo. Let's go into that a little bit deeper, because there is a chapter about unleashing your creativity and how companies recognize that you need a left and a right brain to make the magic and the story happen. But you also allude to the fact that sometimes it's not very natural, that oftentimes companies like ours will do offsites, or they'll create a brainstorm to have that creative outlet happen in that specific instance. What I didn't get, and what I'd love to know a little bit better, is what are some other ways that you can instill from an organizational standpoint more authentic opportunities for creativity and innovation?
So there are two big broad things. One is environment, and the second are sort of catalysts. So what we sometimes forget when we do offsites and a whole bunch of other things is ideas and innovation doesn't happen on command. It's not like, okay, now we're going to have ideas. And just because the environment is we put you in some catalyst ranch and surround you with rubber duckies, it's going to come. It's not going to happen that way, right? And my whole idea is, and at that stage, when you hear what people say, there is no idea is bad, feel free to speak up. My old stuff is, why is it only happening like this one day every 6 months or one day every year? Are other days ideas bad? Are other days where you're not allowed to speak up? Why are you saying? If you actually listen to what people are saying, they're saying you're free of, this is a get out of jail card for one day, and then you go back into jail. So my old stuff is, why don't you take the environment and make it every day? Which is, therefore, create atmosphere where people can speak up, where people aren't scared about talking to their bosses, about sharing bad ideas. One of the things we used to do at both Giant Step and Stockholm IP is they were like, we had crazy people saying crazy things all the time, right? And my whole stuff is, you can say anything you want as long as it isn't disparaging and doesn't make anybody feel bad, right? But we would do reverse things. We would call ourselves lepers, right? When people didn't like us, we would basically say, right? Then we would call ourselves elitists, just to surprise people, like, are you bad or are you good, right? Mm-hmm. I would have this whole thing about the future is brown and Buddhist, and all your people have to disappear. Right? Remember this thing? Mm-hmm. But it was always like fun, right? So people
Yeah.
could sort of speak up. So nobody, as long as nobody felt threatened and nobody felt that they weren't listened and felt safe, that's an environment where you get innovation. You don't get innovation without that. The other one is the catalyst. So the environment, you want the environment to basically be what you try to have at an offsite, but every day. But then what you want to basically say is, what if the offsite doesn't happen that way, only that way, but instead you take some of that money and some of that budget, and you basically tell people that you have a art budget. So my big connection here was this, that the world's best entrepreneurs are artists. Therefore, the best and innovators are artists, because artists start with a blank sheet of paper. And they start with a blank sheet of paper and they write a book, or they start with a blank sheet of paper and they paint, or they have a stone, or they have an empty stage, or they have a blank screen and they light code, right? It's basically artists. And artists basically are what we have to be exposed to. And today, because of Google, right? So if I want to see the world's great art, Google lets me see it. If I want to see a whole bunch of stuff, you all enable more, the reason I've been a big fan of your company is because it gives me godlike power. Right? It allows me to conquer space and distance. So my whole stuff is, why don't we use these technologies to basically tell people that, hey, you can go and become members. So like in Chicago, right? I would basically say, look, I'm going to underwrite a year's membership to any 2 things you want in Chicago, and then if you want more than 2, tell me and I'll, right? So you want to go become a member of the Art Institute or MoMA, or you want to get a subscription to the Goodman or to the Joffrey or whatever, music ensemble, whatever it is, go do it. And then the only thing is, when you come back, let's have little gatherings where people talk about what they learned. And the reason why that's important is you're seeing what artists do. What do artists do? They not only create new stuff, but artists frame ways to see things. When you basically see the first Cubist painting from Picasso, you say, who the hell is this shit? How did he see the world this way, right? So it's a key thing. But the other thing that artists do is they not only frame things different ways, but they show you how to come back from failure. Because every artist, there's no artist that has ever succeeded without being failing. So it shows you, and that's part of innovation. So my stuff is just all around us. Why are we only having it at an offsite? So that's the thing there. But the other one is this, which is when you want to basically give a presentation, we often use, I don't use it because I'm lazy, but we use videos and we use slides and we use a whole bunch of stuff. And often the videos happen to be film or television things, etc. So we're actually using art to tell people things. And when I wanted to tell a boss that he was being like bad, I could do it in one of 2 ways. You're constantly ordering us around. I don't know why you're ordering us around. None of us are following you. Now, if I say that, I don't keep my job. I need to keep my job. So how do I communicate this fine thing to him? And I did this. I basically said, hey, this is French film. And this is not to my French boss. This wasn't to Maurice, because, right? Someone else. Because if I said I'm a French film to Maurice, he'd throw me out of the room. So it was like, okay. So it's like, hey, I've got a French film. I just want to show you this little scene from the French film. It's a very famous scene from an old film. It's too old for you all, called 400 Blows. Okay, and in that there's like a gym teacher who comes out with all of his people, and they're supposed to follow him, and he's blowing the whistle. And there's an overhead scene of Paris, and as he's running, everybody's running off in different directions, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, look at that gym teacher. He's basically going bing, bing, bing. Look at all these people. They're running off in different directions. He said, I got what you're trying to tell me. Thank you very much. But it was done elegantly using art.
Nice. All right. I have a handful more questions,
Sure.
but I'll pause if anybody has questions. If you can start. Yeah, go ahead.
Slightly controversial, but in the abstract question. So I joined Google at the very end of 2016, and in the following 3 years, there was a lot of upheaval about our corporate mission and values and how it reflected our culture, and all of this stuff made the news, so I don't have to go into it. But I'm curious if you have any perspective on that. You mentioned earlier, Facebook, for example, suffered this change of the story that they potentially didn't retain what you might, what you're calling the soul of the business. Are there any things that it's important for Google or individual Googlers to keep in mind based upon some of those things that have happened. And
So what I basically believe is the reason that Google will do, y'all don't need my help, you're a world-class company, but y'all will continue to thrive is primarily because internal opposition is making y'all change. So because y'all were protesting, what basically happens is there was much more inside Facebook of basically the world is against us and we must all be gathered together. At Google, it was like there were factions, like, hey, why did we get rid of Don't Be Evil? What the hell's going on, right? And you all are so powerful that you all have actually changed your management, right? I've always basically said, and I've said this to Carolyn Nevison and everybody, I said, Facebook has one controlling weakness, it's controlling shareholder. Thank you very much. Okay, and what basically begins to happen is when you have a controlling shareholder who can do whatever they want and no, he doesn't listen to anybody, it doesn't matter what anybody says. Like I tell my clients, I basically say all the Fortune 5, it's true for Google too, but all the Fortune 500 advertisers account for less than 30% of the revenue of these major companies. They'll keep you happy, but it doesn't make any difference. It's this long tail advertiser, right? So stop it. Don't think that because you have a good meeting, anything's going to change. It's going to change when Zuckerberg is replaced with either a chairman or he has a board that actually talks. Otherwise, there's not a piece of information that he basically has. You all don't have that problem. You all just change your management very elegantly.
do you think it has more to do with like this hot mic, or is it about a governance structure, or is it the interaction between those things?
I think there are two or three things. One is you all didn't have one person, you all had two people, and you all really had three people because of Eric Schmidt in his early days. And also as a result, you had a much stronger board. Your board is actually a very strong board. And so what tends to basically happen is, and you'll have a very strong CFO, and you'll have a very strong, right? So what has tended to happen is, you all are actually a company that's more likely to make it. All of y'all will make it. It'll be very successful companies. But you're more likely to make it because you'll have actually spoken up, right? I have amazing friends at Facebook, and I think they're also going to speak up. But give you sort of an idea. If you say today that you work at Google or Facebook, I would basically say people are more happy to work at Google than Facebook, right? I'm not talking about environment, just the brand name. Mm-hmm. And so I think you all are doing the right thing. But I do believe the real challenge is to recognize the implications that there is a talk I gave in January of 2018, which you all can see, it's on Ad Exchanger. It was basically a talk where I said it's time to optimize for the citizen. And I mentioned that at the start of my book, right? At the start of my book, I said I gave this talk. And this is what I tell, this is what I basically, I think I said in some section at the offsite with some of you all and some of your management. But I said, this is my basic case that I tell people in my clients. When I had clients, I don't have any. But when I had clients, I would say, look, all this stuff works really well, but how come your business isn't growing? Right? I said, sometimes when you show me about how well all these online programs are working, but you aren't growing, does that mean that you have to spend more on online, or there's something off? Because I said, sometimes I think I'm in a hospital. The monitor tells me I'm getting healthy, but the doctor is the only one who's growing fat. Right? I just give them that analogy. And I say, okay, fine. But you're in business. You're not in a campaign. You're in business. And as business, how about these? What is your data flexibility? What is your strategic flexibility? What is your reputation flexibility? Right? And these are things you should worry about. What you will see, and I think your company is getting used to it, and I'm not sure others have got used to it, you all have become so important that you all are no longer part of the advertising and marketing department. You all are a board level conversation. And a big thing that I've told my clients is no one is coming to disrupt my business because it sucks too much to disrupt. Everyone is coming to disrupt our client's business. Make no mistake. Okay? And so my whole stuff is, remember that you're working with, these are business and society operating systems, these are not advertising operating systems, which is one of the reasons you're seeing CMOs disappear all over the place, right? Because the CMOs, my stuff is, if you're a CMO with any power, you should be on the board of directors of the company. Otherwise, who are you? You know, all these people say, oh, we care all about people, consumers, etc. I said, okay, you got a CFO runs money, CIO runs information, CTO runs technology all on your board. Where's your people person? Right? What has happened is marketing was not taken seriously, but because the future is marketing, the future is Google's and Facebook's and Amazon's and Viacom, CBS and everything else. And society is changing because of these platforms. Boards have to pay attention. So my basic belief is this is going to be an incredible time both for our industry and your industry and for our clients' industry, as long as we realize this isn't about ads.
I'm getting the vibe that it's like restructuring the way that we're thinking about doing business and making these decisions. What are your thoughts on how this is adapted to business schools or the future business leaders?
Business schools are one of the other groups that are being disrupted themselves. So I'm talking to business schools. I'm obviously associated with the University of Chicago booth, but I've gone to Michigan. The other day I was at Duke because they're thinking about how to change. Because in effect, education, healthcare, and finance are the three categories where there's too much GDP in there and not enough value being created. And those are businesses. You all are going to be very big in health for sure. You're trying to be big in finance, right? And I think you all can be very big in education, because the reality of it is the way people are getting educated today is we're pretending that we're still in the 1950s, which we basically aren't. So hopefully that helped you with that, which makes sense.
All right,
But
I think we're
yeah,
at
out of
time.
time.
So if we wouldn't mind giving Rishad a round of applause.